Look, every time the Fed has one of these private, closed-door meetings, regular people like us, we end up footing the bill, especially people who spent years building their income, building their business, or their retirement nest egg. And they just had another one of these meetings, behind the scenes, with the biggest players in global finance. And when those guys huddle in private, yeah, it's rarely because things are going great. So let me walk you through what happened and why the Fed is probably gearing up for another round of QE, or quantitative easing, and what it means for you and your money in 3 simple steps. Step 1 is the liquidity problem. If you've watched the news lately, you've probably heard people throw around words like liquidity, tightening, fund stress. Here's the 5th grade version of all that. The money pipes inside the banking system are getting clogged. They're not broken and they're not exploding, but they're clogged. And they're clogged enough that the water pressure is dropping. Let me keep this simple. There's a rate called repo. That's just banks borrowing money from each other overnight. And there's another rate called IOR, or interest on reserves, which is what the Fed pays banks to park money with them. Normally, repo stays below IOR. That's the everything is calm zone. But lately, repo has climbed. It touched zero and it popped above IOR. That's the system quietly saying, hey, someone out there might be in big trouble. Here's a Midwest version of that. 2 buddies ask you for $1,000. Buddy A always pays people back. Buddy B is a good hang, but let's just say you're not going to give him the keys to your house. So Buddy B often offers collateral, an old lawnmower, flat screen TV, whatever. Buddy A offers nothing except his word. Who gets the better rate? Right. Trust matters more than collateral. That's exactly what is happening between banks right now. When repo trades higher than IOR, it means banks would rather overpay than risk lending to the wrong guy. And this is not a math issue, it's a trust issue. If you've ever wondered why inflation feels like a tax nobody voted for, this is the plumbing behind it. When the pipes are clogged, regular people, they're the ones who end up soaked. Now, step 2, the Fed's private meeting. Here's where it gets real for your wallet. The Financial Times just reported the New York Fed convened a meeting with Wall Street firms over key lending faculties. They held this on the sidelines of the Treasury Market Conference. Roughly 25 massive Wall Street firms were in the room, and they pulled it together fast. That alone tells you the Fed did not like what they're seeing in the money pipes. So the official story, we're just asking for feedback on the standing repo facility. Yeah, in my high school football career, it was completely dominant. If you don't count all the time where I spent a bunch of time on the sidelines. Let's call this what it is. The Fed was nervous, and when the Fed gets nervous, they check with the people who actually move money around. So here's the simple version. There are 2 repo lanes, bank-to-bank lane, the real market, and the Fed lanes, their backup safety valve. If the real market gets expansive, banks should hop over to the Fed lanes and borrow cheaper. That's how the Fed keeps the roof from not leaking. But right now, banks are not using the Fed's lane. Why? Well, the stigma of using that lane. Using the Fed's lane is like walking into a crowded gym and asking for help lifting the bar off your chest. Everybody notices. You're embarrassed. You look like the weakest person in the gym. Even though borrower names don't get released for 2 years, insiders are always able to sniff out who needs the Fed's help. That's why Roberto Perillo, the Fed's SOMA manager, said repo trades above IOR are now back to levels from 2018 to 19. In 2019, repo blew up to 10%. And this happened overnight. And it almost took the whole system with it. And here's the thing. On October 31st, banks quietly borrowed a record $50 billion from the Fed's emergency facility. You don't do that unless something smells off. So now the Fed is boxed in. This isn't about running out of money. It's about the banks losing confidence in each other. The financial version of a side eye at Thanksgiving. So now step 3, what happens if QE comes back? All right, let's talk about the part everybody cares about. If the Fed starts printing money again, what happens to all your money? First, let me give you another simple metaphor. QE is like the Fed turning on a giant money hose. It pushes more water into the lake, and in the lake, a rising tide raises every boat. So that means stocks, real estate, business value, anything that floats. This is why rich people love assets, because they rise with the tide. You cannot outwork a money hose. Let's make it even simpler. Here's history in one sentence. Whenever the Fed prints out a lot of money, prices go up faster than income. Remember COVID? Remember when they printed a bunch of money during COVID? And it's not every price, and it's not every time, but enough to matter. Here's what doesn't matter as much as people think. Bank reserve charts, academic arguments, every wiggle in the Fed's balance sheet, cable news static. Do you want the Jimmy version? When the Fed hits the print button, assets rise. When they drain money, assets wobble. It's very simple. That's it. That's the whole game. That is why the wealthy own rental properties, businesses, land, and hard assets. They want boats in the water when the tide rises. And that's where the opportunity is right now. Because what we're seeing today is the trust breaking in the plumbing. Banks overpaying for safety, the Fed quietly meeting with Wall Street. All of that usually comes right before they turn the hoses back on. And you want to be holding assets before that happens, not chasing after them. If you've ever wondered why some people get richer during chaos, it is because they understand a simple rule. When the Fed prints, assets move. When assets moves, owners win. But here's the catch. You have to actually own something that floats. If you sit in cash during a rising tide, that's like keeping your boat in the garage while the lake fills up. Everybody's drifting higher, but you're still just sitting in the driveway wondering why you're not moving. You don't want to get stuck in your driveway. And that's why I pulled together this next video back here. And that is why I'm always talking about getting stable, boring, cash flowing rentals into your portfolio. You don't need to be a landlord. You don't need to fix toilets. You don't need to quit your job. You just need to have boats in the water. So if you don't have any boats or you don't have enough boats, watch this.